H-O-T-T-O-G-O, you can take me hot to go. Before we begin the tutorial, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, my personal favorite marketplace for crochet and knitting written patterns, Ribbler. Ribbler is a free app/website that has lots of free and paid patterns, including written patterns from yours truly, uploaded by individual designer sellers. What's so unique about Ribbler is its amazing interactive pattern format. You can track your progress line by line, view stitch tutorials, convert units and the language, and all of my patterns are time-stamped with the corresponding portion of the video tutorials. But my favorite part of Ribbler is their software for creating patterns. As a designer, I love how easy and straightforward it is, and I don't even need to think about formatting because it does it for me. I always write up my patterns on Ribbler, and usually my patterns go on sale on Ribbler before any of my other shops. To get the most out of Ribbler, check out their membership tiers. With membership, you can skip the ads, remove the free pattern limits, convert PDFs to interactive patterns, receive free patterns every month, create your own tags and boards of patterns, and so much more. Use my code YEJIA to get 25% off your membership. We're gonna start off by creating the Raglan style shirt, but let me do a quick little explanation as to how I determined my stitch count distribution. Essentially with a Raglan style shirt, you've got just your neckline. So that's, you know, your neckline. Ignore how bumpy that got. But you have your neckline, and then you have the sort of four corners that come off of your neckline. So essentially this would be your back, this would be your arm, and then the front. So the size of the starting circle, your neckline, is going to be determined by how many chains you start off with, and then we can determine the distribution of the stitch counts. So for myself, I'm going to be starting off with 80 chains. However, each of these like little corners that are coming off to kind of split up between the arm and the back and the arm and the front, etc., etc., all of these corners are going to account for a single stitch itself. So what I mean by that is whatever your starting chain number, you're gonna add +4 in total, so +1 for each corner. So technically I'm gonna start off with 84 chains. As for how we're going to distribute this stitch count, essentially what you want to do is you want to start off with the starting number without accounting for each of the corners. So for me, that's 80. And then you're going to divide your starting chain number, so mine is 80, by 4. So one for each section that you have. So technically then this would be 20, 20, 20, and 20. However, I don't necessarily want my arms sections to be as big as my back and my front. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of stitches to the back and front, but essentially instead of 20, I'm going to decrease that count to 18, which means that I have 4 more stitches that need to be like accounted for somewhere. And for myself, I'm just gonna do 22 and 22. So if you have a larger chest size and you need more room in the front, what I would do is I would, like, you know, say I'm gonna give myself 24 stitches here, and then this would go back down to like 20. So essentially you need to do like a tension/gauge swatch, and we'll kind of see what the distribution of stitches would be best for you. Okay, so now I have my hook and my yarn, and I'm going to go ahead and give myself a little slip knot, and then go ahead and shimmy that onto my hook. So again, for myself, I'm going to be starting off with 84 chains. Now you can either just simply create a chain, just like so, to start off your work, but I would personally really recommend that you start off with a foundation half double crochet, just so that you want the neckline to be like quite fitted on you, right? But you want it to still be like stretchy enough to fit over your head. And I personally find that foundation half double crochet chain stitches are much more elastic. It can still kind of hold the shape at the neckline, but it'll really easily go over your head. I'm gonna start off with chain 2, so 1, 2, and then I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to insert my hook into the first chain that I created, so the second chain from my hook, and I'm gonna go through the front loop as well as the back loop, just like so, and then you're going to yarn over, and then pull that yarn over up, yarn over, create a loop, yarn over, and then go through all 3 loops on your hook. That is the first half double crochet for the foundation chain. And then now to continue making more foundation half double crochets, you're going to start off with a yarn over, and you're going to insert your hook into that loop that we had previously created, making sure to go through the back and the front loops, just like so. Yarn over, pull up, yarn over, make a loop, yarn over, finish your half double crochet. We're going to yarn over and we're going to go into that loop that we previously created, going through not only the front but also the back loop, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, make your loop, yarn over, and pull through all 3 to finish off your half double crochet. So far I've created 1, 2, 3 foundation half double crochet chain. I'm going to continue creating until I have 84 chains. I now have 84 foundation half double crochet chains. As you can see, this is what it is starting to look like, and as you can also see, it's quite elastic, which is great for our purposes. At this point, I am going to slip stitch my work together. I really also enjoy using the foundation half double crochet or foundation chains in general, just because I find that I twist my work a lot less frequently because there's like an actual like, you know, row of stitches instead of just like a chain, which can get really twisted easily, especially when you are going to slip stitch them together like I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to make sure that my stitches are not twisted, and I'm going to slip stitch into the very first foundation half double crochet stitch that I created here. Go ahead and slip, so yarn over and slip stitch that all together. Double, triple check that nothing is twisted. Also at this point, I would definitely make sure that you can actually fit it over your head, because if not, you may need to experiment with the stitch count, etc, etc. So we are now ready to start creating our raglan neckline and defining the different corners, the 4 corners. So I'm going to start off by chaining 2. This is going to make a little bit more sense as we work up our stitches, and you're going to see more of what I mean. But essentially, I'm going to be starting off with a raglan corner stitch, and then working up my arm section, making a raglan corner, working my front, raglan corner, sleeve, raglan corner, and then the back. We've chained our 2 chains, and I'm going to be inserting my hook into the same stitch where we created our slip stitch. So I'm going to start off with a yarn over, insert my hook into that stitch, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, and then pull through all 3 loops on your hook. So that first chain 2 is going to count as a half double crochet in terms of like stitch counts. And then I'm going to chain 2, so 1, 2. And then I'm going to make 2 more half double crochets into the exact same stitch. So that is your first little corner of your raglan neckline. And then from here, I am going to be using my little stitch count that I created. I'm going to be creating my arm sleeve section first. So for the next 18 stitches, I'm going to just do a regular half double crochet. The next 18 stitches, that's 1. So in my next stitch, or my 19th stitch, I'm going to be creating my raglan corner. So to create your raglan corner, you're going to insert 2 half double crochets, and then chain 2, and then insert 2 more half double crochets into the exact same stitch. So you should start seeing like a little square. Essentially, I'm going to be working my front portion. So for the next 22 stitches, I'm going to be just working, you know, regular half double crochet. And this is 22. Okay, so I've done 22 stitches. And then now in my 23rd stitch here, my next one, I'm going to be creating my other raglan corner. So again, that's 2 half double crochets in the same stitch, then chain 2, then going into the same stitch, we're going to give ourselves 2 more half double crochets, And there is your pretty little corner. And then now we're going to work on the second sleeve. So that's again 18. Okay, so I've done 18 stitches. And now it's time to work on my 19th stitch, which is going to be my raglan corner. So again, 1, 2, 1, 2, and 1, 2. And then if I have done my calculations correctly, I should have 22 stitches for the back. 21 and 22. Okay, so yay, I'm happy I have done my calculations correctly. Your work should start looking like a square, rectangle. When I first began creating the raglan shirt, I was doing like a chain 2, slip stitching each round. What ended up happening though was by using chain 2s every round and slip stitching it together, it created for this like odd diagonal seam in the back where I was originally putting it. And so instead we're not going to be creating any more chains or slip stitching our rounds together. We're simply going to be working round after round after round of half double crochets. But essentially we are going to be creating a half double crochet into the top of that chain 2 that we created from the previous round. Remember how I said that that chain 2 is going to act like a half double crochet stitch? Well, we're going to work into it now just like it is a half double crochet stitch. So making sure I go into the top of that chain 2, I'm going to insert my half double crochet. And then, you know, we had our first like actual half double crochet stitch. I'm going to go into that one now. And then create another half double crochet stitch. Now at this point, I'm actually going to move my stitch marker from the chains that I have here. And I'm going to mark out that first sort of half double crochet that we created into our chain 2. That is just going to mark out that this is like the beginning of our row, which will become much more important later on when we are connecting our rounds in order to create our sleeves. But for now, I'm just going to mark that one out. And now I'm going to work into the chain 2 space that we created previously. And I'm going to give myself 2 half double crochets, chain 2, and then 2 more half double crochets in that same chain space. As you can start seeing, this is that raglan corner that we are creating. And then now I'm going to go into the first like actual stitch and then just work all those stitches as normal. So I'm going to work all these stitches until I get to my next raglan corner. And then just as like a sanity check, stitch count check, you know, the first row that we started off with was 18, and then every row that we create, we're adding 4 stitches per section. So for instance, this first sleeve section that I've been creating, we started off with 18 stitches, and then we increased to 22 stitches, and then now we should have 26 stitches on this row if we count from the first like actual stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. And then 2 more stitches into this raglan corner to count for like this arm section or sleeve section. So 25 and 26. And then chain 2. And then finish out that raglan corner. Cool. But essentially, sanity check, I do indeed have 26 stitches on this sleeve, which is good because I started out with 18 and then plus 4, 22, plus 4, 26. And that's how we should be increasing. I think that one of the trickiest parts with doing these raglan corners is how to define the first and last stitches like right before those raglan corners. The thing that will like have you losing stitch count real easily and real quickly is if you kind of ignore or skip over those first or last stitches. So after we've created this corner, I want you to look at your work very closely. But in this corner, you can see that in this chain space, I have these 2 stitches. If you're kind of a beginner, it would be really easy to kind of ignore this and be like, oh, this one's my first stitch. But that's how you decrease your stitch count dramatically, very quickly, by kind of like forgetting this first stitch here. So what I mean by examine your work very closely is that we can see that we have 2 stitches in this chain space, and each like stitch or the loops that we're going to work into are on top. So that's 1 and that's 2, right? So this is the first stitch that we're going to work into. Half double crochet, half double crochet. Make sure that you're paying particular attention to those first and last stitches right before and after the chain 2 space, because I was making that mistake the first time I made the Raglan shirt, and I was like, why is my stitch count so off? It's probably because you're missing out on the first or last stitch right before that chain 2 space. So just be really wary of that. But otherwise, you know, you're going to just continue creating your standard half double crochet stitches all the way around. So I finished working up my front section all the way up to my sleeve portion here, and again I just want to show you really quickly because this is exactly where I lost my stitch count. When we are looking at these raglan corners, we have the last stitch right before our chain 2 space, and then we have the first stitch right after our chain 2 space. Right, so make sure that you are actually working into those stitches. That was the last stitch right before the chain 2 space, and then creating my raglan corner. And then every so often I would double check your stitch count and make sure that the sections are increasing properly, and it should increase at a rate of +4 stitches every single row. So again, with my front row, or my front panel here, I started off with 22 stitches. So then my second row should be 26. And then this third row that I've done should now be 30 stitches. So let me double check. So 7, 28, 29, 30. Beautiful. Okay, so now I'm just going to continue creating my rows, and then I'll meet you back up once I'm back at that first corner right here. So this is what your little square raglan, rectangular raglan should start looking like. And now I am back at my very first, you know, stitch on this row, which is that raglan corner. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my stitch marker out, continue my half double crochets into those stitches. So essentially I'm just gonna continue repeating exactly what I've been doing, repeating this row until I have a raglan that is big enough to actually have 2 corners connect so that my arm can fit. As you can see, it cannot fit right now. So for myself, I believe I did 12 rows in total, so I'm working on my 4th row right now. And again, the amount of rows that you work may be different from my amount of rows. It really just depends on your measurement, your size, your preference, your hook, your yarn. A lot of different factors can go into it. I have completed my sort of beginning of my raglan, and I am ready to start connecting the corners together in order to like shape out the sleeves. Just for like a count check, I am currently working with 66 stitches on the back and the front, and 62 stitches on the sleeves. In terms of measurements, approximately 14 inches for the front slash back, and then the sides should be like fairly similar, just like a little bit smaller. So yeah, the sleeve is looking to be about 13.5 inches. So we are going to start connecting the sleeve portions here. We're going to connect these corners together, and then we're going to connect these corners together. So, okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to continue working all of our stitches. You're going to continue your stitches, and then you're not going to create another corner here once you get back to this corner. So I've reached back to my corner, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold my 2 corners, right? Because this is the front, this is the back, this is the sleeve. I am going to fold these 2 together, and I'm going to insert my hook into the like chain 2 space in my first corner here, and I'm also going to go through the chain 2 space right here. And then I'm going to complete my half double crochet. And then now you are connected to the front portion. So now we can go ahead into our first like actual half double crochet stitch on the front panel and continue our stitch work. So then as you can see, our first sleeve here is connected, and then I'm going to continue working this row, and then once I get to my other corner I'm going to connect it here, but I'll be back to show you how I connect this corner. Okay, so I've now reached my other corner here, And I'm gonna do the exact same thing where I'm gonna put my hook underneath this chain 2 space, and then I'm gonna go into this chain 2 space and then go ahead and pull that up and create your half double crochet. And now I am ready to go back into the back portion here and continue my stitch work. So we have now joined our sleeves. Now we have sleeves. Yay, who doesn't like that? And then I am actually gonna go ahead and complete 2 more rows. So including this row, that's 3 rows. I'm gonna be doing 3 rows total. Hello. Okay, so I'm trying it on just to do a little sanity check, making sure that everything fits the way that I want it to. Let's talk pixel grid / alpha pattern. I will put up on the screen a picture of the pixel grid that I used that I made for Hot to Go. I want this tutorial to be useful for anybody trying to create a raglan style t-shirt with any type of graphic on it, whether it be, I don't know, like a number, a font. I'm gonna go ahead and link a couple of websites that are really helpful in creating your own pixel grid, alpha pattern, whatever you want to call it. So you can, you know, take your graphic or your letters or whatever it might be and then translate it into a pixel grid. The first thing is that you want to do some math. Don't be like me and try to eyeball it. Unless you're like really good at eyeballing stuff and estimating stuff, I would try to do a little bit of calculations. Like I would specifically look for where is the middle of your picture / your image or your font or whatever, and then make sure that that corresponds to the middle of your shirt, because we are going to continue working in rounds. And so if you don't account for that, you're going to have your text or your font or your image or whatever, it's going to be really wonky, it's going to be like really askew, it's going to be partially, you know. So make sure that you do some of those calculations so that you actually are centering your work. Additionally, with alpha patterns / pixel grid, there are a couple of different ways that you can do color changing. Let me kind of talk you through some of the different methods of color changing. So with color changing, you can carry over your yarn. Carrying your yarn essentially means that you are going to crochet over your secondary color in order to kind of crochet it into your work. The downside of carrying your yarn like that though is that you're going to create a really dense fabric by doing so just be wary of that. And then also on top of that, it can be really tricky, especially if you're a beginner, to maintain a very even tension throughout. But for my purposes, I want my t-shirt to be a very summery light top, and so I didn't really want to carry my yarn like that. Now another option that you can do is you can float your yarn. Floating your yarn essentially means that like you have a stitch right here and you have a stitch right here where you want the colors to be, and then you're gonna like on the back side you're gonna see like the yarn is just gonna like be floating in space, right? And that is, I think, easier in terms of like tension and in terms of like creating a less dense fabric. However, I personally wouldn't really recommend floating a lot, just because it does leave for like a lot of random, you know, strands of yarn that are just like there which would be fine, like maybe if you like sew a patch on it or like a lining on it, because like I would fear that going into like the washing machine or like getting washed. I just feel like that is like you're more likely to get into trouble with floating your yarn like a long ways. Particularly, I think that if you use the third option, which is using bobbins, you're going to have a much better time. Bobbins is this idea of like having small balls of little yarn in your secondary color that you kind of like pick up and you drop, you pick up and you drop. And I'm going to show you how I use my bobbins. The method of color changing that you use is going to be highly dependent on your graphic / image. I would say for the most part, if your graphic has it so that in each round there's a lot of empty space in between your secondary colors. So like let's say that like if you're doing a font like me or text and you're having a row where it's just like one color or one stitch is the secondary color, and then you have like a bunch in the primary color, and then you have another stitch all the way out here that's the secondary color, that is an instance in which I would recommend using bobbins, or like a combination of bobbins and floating. If you are actually like creating like a heart instead, let's say you're making a heart right in the center, right? Then you have like a lot of your like secondary color right next to each other. That is an instance in which I would recommend using carrying your yarn over as a method. But also I will say that like these three methods can be used all in combination. Like you're gonna see that I'm going to use all of those three different methods in combination. It's just that I would really advise that you really assess your graphic or your image and kind of see like, okay, how am I gonna do this? Because there are these different methods of color changing. You don't simply have to always like carry your yarn over. You don't always have to use bobbins. You don't always have to use floating. You can use a combination of any of these methods in order to get the best tension, the best color changes, the cleanest color changes, the best stitch definition, etc, etc. Let me stop yapping and I will show you how I create my color changes. The other thing that I want to really like emphasize the importance of is marking out the center of your image, graphic, text, whatever. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to kind of fold your work in half and then count the middle of the stitches here. So I have 22 stitches right here, so my middle would be about the 11th stitch. And then once I get to my 11th stitch, I'm gonna like pretend there's an imaginary line going all the way down, and then I'm gonna mark out approximately where the middle stitch on the front section is. From there, my very first few color changes actually occur like way to the side of that center, but because I have the center marked out, I can more so be able to like determine where I should start my row of color changes, if that makes sense. The first time that I made this raglan tee, I didn't do that, and I kept having the text like way under my armpit over here. So like definitely mark out where the middle of your t-shirt is in order to really center that graphic. For myself, I'm now looking at the front part of my work and I've marked out the middle, right? And I've also calculated that from the middle, from the center, I should be starting my H 22 spaces from the middle. I've also marked out where that 22nd place would be, right? So in order to use bobbins, bobbins are just like these little bits of yarn that you use to pick up and drop your stitches. I would prep a couple of these. In terms of how much length you're gonna need for each bobbin, that's really gonna depend on your specific image. You know, if you have like a really big heart or something, you're obviously gonna use a lot more yarn in order to cover up all that space. When you are working with text, you're not gonna need as much yarn. I would say, however, always lean on the side of having too much yarn rather than not enough, because otherwise it's not like the biggest of deals, but you are gonna have to like make a lot of knots in between your yarn, and that's just gonna make your graphic look even more messy. But I'm just gonna go ahead and start twisting. I think technically bobbins are like the term for like the plastic little things that hold your yarn. I'm just gonna roll up little balls of yarn and call it a day. I don't know that it's like super necessary to actually like go out and purchase bobbins of your own, but if you need it for like accessibility reasons, or it just makes like the work easier for you, then go right on ahead. But otherwise, I think you're just fine, just kind of balling it up. So now I have a couple bobbins. I think in total I am going to use 4 bobbins and then use a combination of carrying over yarn and floating. So let's talk about the way in which we are going to create our color change. Now obviously I'm going to be very specific with the hot to go tech, but hopefully you can extrapolate this knowledge to you know, incorporate whatever image or design you want to. I feel like it would be so cute to make a brat shirt, like Charlie XCX brat. If I had neon green yarn, I would totally do it. Somebody please buy neon green yarn and make a brat shirt. That would be so iconic. Anyways, so the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my secondary color and I'm going to make a slip knot. You know how we had like our middle stitch and then we calculated how far out from that we would need to start our color changes? My H starts, like the color change starts 22 stitches before my middle stitch. So I marked out my 22nd stitch, and now in order to make our color change, we are first going to insert just like normal. So like yarn over, insert your hook, and then yarn over and pull up. Once you're on the last stitch before the stitch that you need to like actually have that color change, you're now going to pull up your secondary color. So I'm gonna go ahead and shimmy that onto my hook, and I'm gonna pull up my secondary color first. Like I'm finishing up that last stitch using my secondary color. And then often when you are working with like other colors and you're changing colors, etc., you're gonna find that this is really a challenge of tension. And so what I would recommend is that making sure that everything is like taut, but like not too tight either. It's gonna take a lot of practice, so if you get frustrated the first few times, don't worry, you got this, I believe in you. Like you can kind of see that my primary color, the red one, is wanting to be really loose, like loosey-goosey. So you're gonna wanna pull it tight in order to maintain a good tension. I have, according to my graphic, I have these next 2 stitches in white. Normally, I would recommend that you crochet in your ends, but heartbreakingly, I cannot recommend that in creating a graphic, because when you do that, you're gonna see like stripes of the other color yarn, which whether it's your primary or secondary or whatever, you're gonna see stripes of it. I just think that it kind of ruins the stitch definition. You're gonna have to actually weave in some ends later, which is annoying, but it's okay, we'll survive. This is what I mean by carrying your yarn. So the carrying your yarn method means that I have my secondary color that I'm working with right now, and then my primary color in the back. And I'm kind of stacking it on top of my stitches right here. And I'm taking my secondary color and I'm gonna go ahead into my next stitch and I'm crocheting around my primary color right here. I'm yarning over, I'm pulling up, and I'm finishing up my half double crochet, right? And another thing about tension, right? Like we need to continue to pull on our secondary, or I guess this is my primary color, but whatever color like you're not actually using and you're crocheting over, make sure that you're kind of pulling it taut. Otherwise it can like crochet and really loose and that can really end up messing with your tension. I have one more stitch in my secondary color, so I'm gonna go ahead into my stitch, right, over, and I'm gonna crochet over my primary color. So I'm crocheting it into my work. And now I'm ready to switch back to my primary color. Because I'm ready to switch to my primary color, what I'm going to do is I'm gonna kind of twist my yarn so that I'm kind of sending my white yarn to the back, and I'm pulling up with my primary color, which is my red yarn. Just like so. And then this is the thing that like I'm using a combination of carrying your yarn, bobbins, floating, etc., to get the best result for myself. And this is what I mean with bobbins. You picked it up, right? And now you're just gonna drop it. You're just gonna drop it, you're gonna let it be, right? And now we can go ahead and finish out our row with our primary color. And two, at this point, because you have started your graphic, I would say that you don't actually really need this middle stitch marker anymore. For this row, I just had those 2 boxes, pixels, you know, whatever you want to call it, those 2 stitches. That's all I had for this row. So this is why the bobbin method is like very helpful, so that otherwise, like if I carried my yarn all the way through, you would just see white stripes all the way through, and it would create for like a really dense fabric. So I would highly recommend utilizing bobbins and just dropping it when you don't need it, and then going ahead to finish out your row. So I'm gonna go ahead and crochet all the way around, back around, and I'll go ahead and show you how I make my next row. because I'm gonna add some more bobbins. If you don't want an image or you know, any type of pixel grid or anything like that, honestly at this point you just continue making rounds until the panel covers your bust area. I am now back at my H in my hot to go. So like I said before, I'm using a combination of floating, carrying yarn, and bobbins. The other thing about bobbins is that it can get very twisted very easily, so I would really recommend that you like make sure that your bobbins are coming out straight from your work. What I mean by I am using a combination of floating, carrying yarn, and etc, etc. You saw earlier how I carried my primary yarn color, right? And even though I carried it behind the white, like you can't really see it too much, right? Maybe you can, but it's not significant, so it's fine. But what I mean by I am going to use some floating methods as well is that now I am going to continue using this exact same bobbin for the H, and I'm going to wrap around. I'm going to pull that right back up. And like I said, your other color that you're not actually actively using, the tension can get a little wonky on that. So make sure that you are pulling it taut so that you're not working like with a really loose stitch right here. If you see the back here, you see that I did in fact float that yarn. And that's what I mean by floating, is that it's like just strands of yarn in the back. Again, I'm going to be carrying my primary color. So this is what it looks like. I'm sorry if you hear a lot of tapping in the background. I don't know what my upstairs neighbors are doing. They've just been tapping away at their floor. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my yarn over, and I'm gonna go into my next stitch, and I'm also gonna go underneath the float, and I'm gonna go underneath my primary yarn in order to crochet it in. So I'm gonna yarn over, and I'm going to pull up my work, and then I'm going to send the white yarn to the back, and I'm going to bring up my red yarn, and I'm going to switch my colors now because I only needed one stitch in the white, right? And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I pull that white color taut so that it's not like loosey-goosey, right? Okay, so now I'm going to go into my next stitch. I'm gonna go ahead and use my red to create my stitches. And for myself, I have 17 red stitches before I need another bobbin to start my T, the top of my T. 16 done, and I'm about to finish my 17th, but because I am changing my colors, I don't really want to float this all the way through. That just to me is like a lot of floating, and I don't want super long strands of yarn isolated like that. I'm gonna start another bobbin. If you are using a different image, I would it's like mostly up to your own discretion in order to figure out like, is this a long strand? Like, am I okay with that? Or do I want to start another bobbin? I'm gonna go ahead and pull that up. I'm going to be carrying my red, and I'm going to be crocheting around it, pulling the red top and also pulling it front. Going to complete the stitch with the red because I only needed one stitch in the white. And then I have another 7 stitches until my next color change. I think another rule of thumb too is that like with bobbins, I would start a new bobbin with like every new word that you are incorporating. So like this is technically the T in hot, but then like for the next T, even though it's only 7 stitches away, I'm going to be using a new bobbin for it because that's the first letter of 2. And I'm going to use that bobbin for the word 2. Sorry, my camera battery died. Essentially, I was just saying that I hope that this is like enough to inform you on how to crochet your own little color changes and your own image, whatever it might be. I am gonna go ahead and continue creating my pixels just like so, and I'm really just following my pixel grid, so I'm gonna continue, and once I am done with my pixel grid slash alpha pattern, I'll come back and I'll show you how we create the rest of the shirt. I have been having to hear the tapping noise like all day long, and I emailed my building manager, and apparently nobody's lived in the unit above us for like the past month and a half. So now I'm very confused, and I'm now convinced that there's a ghost haunting my apartment. Anyways, ghost or not, we are finishing this hot to go. Okay, this is what the graphic is looking like, or my text is looking like. So yeah, that is generally how you incorporate a pixel grid into this style of shirt. And then from here, I'm going to show you the finishing details that I'm going to incorporate. So one of those things is that I'm going to add just a couple more rows underneath my G just to really make sure that the font like stands out and it doesn't kind of get lost. I'm going to make like 3 rows past this G. And then I'll be back to show you how I create the waist panel. And I am now going to, oh, also, I don't know if I've shown you yet, but this is what the inside of our work is looking like. So as you can see, there is still a little bit of floating, right? And I definitely have a lot of ends to weave in. What I'm now going to do is I'm now going to make a slip stitch into the next stitch to just kind of like end it. We just ended like the bust panel, right? Now what I'm going to do is I am going to chain a length. That length is going to be the length of our waist panel. However, there's a couple of different ribbing techniques that you can use when creating this shirt. The original t-shirt that I had made, this is the ribbing that I did, which was a half double crochet through the 3rd loop only. And as you can see, it's quite nice. I actually want to create a 2x2 ribbing. So the ribbing technique that you just saw, this ribbing technique, this is more so closer to like a 1x1 ribbing. And you are warned now, this ribbing technique is going to use a lot of slip stitches. So I think that especially if you're a beginner, making a lot of slip stitches constantly and working on the tension, it can be great if you're up for the challenge and to like learn more and better about your tension. But if you just want a finished garment, it might take you a really long time. So, and for myself, I'm going to be starting off with 51 chains and I'm going to be working 50 stitches. Okay, so now I'm going to slightly turn my work and work into starting from the 2nd chain from my hook, so skipping that 1 chain. I am going to create a row of half double crochets all the way down, and then once we get to the end of a row, I'll show you how I attach the ribbing to this bottom edge. Okay, so once you are done with your row of half double crochets, you are gonna now slip stitch onto the edge of the like bust here. If you want the fit to be tighter, use more slip stitches, and if you want the fit to be a little bit looser, use fewer slip stitches. But for myself, I am going to be slip stitching right back into that first place where we slip stitched into originally when we were like done working this row. So I'm going to slip stitch into that, and I'm going to use 3 slip stitches here. So 1, 2, 3, making sure that I have a relatively tight tension on my yarn, and then I'm going to turn my work and I'm going to skip those 3 slip stitches that I just did. And now I'm going to make a row of slip stitches into the backs of our loops. So just like so. My tip on keeping a better tension while doing this is to kind of hold the chain, like this chain, hold this like kind of taut and upwards. And I feel like that allows you to have like a really nice even tension all throughout your work. Once you are done with that row, you're going to make 1 chain and turn your work. And then we're going to skip that turning chain, so that first chain that we have, and we're going to go into the backs of our loops and yet again create another row of slip stitches. So again, I'm just going into the back loops only and creating a row of slip stitches. And then once I finish this row out, I'll meet you back up here to show you again how to slip stitch the ribbing to the bust panel. Okay, so I finished my row of slip stitches, and now I'm going to slip stitch into this bottom edge once more, but I am going to go into the next sort of stitch that hasn't been slip stitched into already. Kind of a tongue twister. I'm going to use 1 slip stitch together, turn my work, skipping that slip stitch, and then going into the back loops only and creating your row of slip stitches. So again, you're just going to repeat a whole bunch of slip stitches. I warned you that you're going to continue that until the end of the row, and then I'll meet back up to tell you what to do next. Okay, so I've now completed that row of slip stitches, and I'm going to give myself one turning chain to end my work, and I'm going to once again create half double crochets into the back loops only. And from here, you know, you're really going to be just repeating the first row of half double crochets, and then the second row of slip stitches, the third row of slip stitches, the fourth row of slip stitches, and then we're going to repeat and do the half double crochets with the 3 rows of slip stitches back and forth. In order to seam to the sides of my waist panel together, I'm gonna kind of be looking in the inside or the wrong side of my work, so you can see that this is the wrong side, this is the right side. And I am going to go ahead, and the last row that I did was a slip stitch row all the way back up to connect the ribbing to the bust. And from here, I'm gonna go ahead and insert my hook into this horizontal bar in front, or this like almost like third loop. And then from there, I'm gonna go into the corresponding first stitch on the original chain that we created. And I'm going to slip stitch that all together. So again, going into that sort of front bar, and then into the next stitch, and then slip stitching it all together. I finished one sleeve, so we have a little bit of a reference as to what we are working with. Now, in order to kind of avoid a whole lot of bunching right at the armpit here, I am going to be basically making rounds of half double crochet, but decreasing it as I go. Now, if you're finding that you have a lot of bunching, or you don't like the amount of bunching there is, then I would decrease more frequently, and if you actually need more room in the arm area, then I would just do away with the decreases or decrease less frequently. What we are going to do is we are going to make a slip knot, and I am going to go into my first little stitch that I see right here in the sort of armpit of our sleeve, and then I'm going to pull up my yarn. So pull that up, and then I'm going to be crocheting around this end just so I don't have to weave it in later. I am going to chain 2, and then I am going to start creating half double crochets all around this sleeve, crocheting around that end just so that I can weave that end in as I go and I don't have to deal with it later. But I am going to go all the way around. My sleeves stitch count for this first row is 62. Oh, also additionally, I would mark out your very first stitch on this row. But I'm going to go ahead and complete this row, and then I'll be back to show you how I decrease right here at the armpit. So now I am back at my very first stitch, and I'm going to start making my decreases. So I'm going to decrease on the first 2 stitches of the row and the last 2 stitches of the row. So every row I am decreasing by a stitch count of 2. So I'm going to take out my stitch marker, and I'm going to go into my first stitch right here, and I'm going to yarn over and pull up, and then I'm going to insert my hook into the next stitch, yarn over and pull up, yarn over and pull through all 4 loops on your hook, and then go ahead and remark that out so you don't lose your spot. And then you're going to just half double crochet just as usual all the way back around, and then I'll see you at the last 2 stitches to show you once again how I create my decreases. Okay, I'm at my last 2 stitches before my stitch marker, and so I'm going to go ahead and create yet another decrease, just like so. And then from here, I am going to create 5 total rows. So I just finished my first row of decreases. I'm going to do 5 total rows of decreases. So 4 more to go. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and then I'll show you how we do the little ribbing on the sleeve. It's really similar to the other ribbing technique that we did for the waist panel, just slightly different measurements. Okay, so I've done my final round. I've made all my decreases, and now I am at 52 stitches. When you are making your decreases as well, or whether or not you're making decreases, I would aim to have a stitch count in a multiple of 4, just because that is the number of stitches that we kind of like attach the ribbing to the rest of our work. In terms of like if you're doing ribbing like this, if you're doing a slightly different ribbing, then just keep in mind that you want your stitch count to be somewhat similar. There's sometimes where you can kind of fudge it a little bit, honestly, and it's just not that big of a deal. But in general, you kind of do want to have a stitch count that's like either a multiple of 3 or 4, or however many stitches you use to connect your ribbing to the rest of your panels. So before I start my ribbing, I am going to slip stitch into that very first stitch of the row, just to kind of like even out the row, if that makes sense. And then I am going to do my same 2x2 ribbing technique on this cuff here. But I'm only going to do 7 stitches, which would be 8 chains to begin with. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right, and then we are going to slightly turn our work and working into the backs of our chains. So I'm going to go into that first back loop and then create my half double crochet. So for the collar, we are yet again going to do a ribbed technique, and I'm going to start in the back corner here. There's no like real rhyme or reason as to where to start. I just don't want the seam to be up in the front, so I tend to just start on the back corner whenever possible. So I went ahead and into my very first stitch right here, and then I've already made this slip knot, and I'm going to tighten that up on my hook, slip it up, and then I'm gonna go ahead and chain 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, twisting your work slightly, working into the back loops, starting off with that first row of half double crochets, and then again working 3 slip stitches and then the rows of slip stitches as well. So I'm just going to do the exact same ribbing technique on the collar here, and then you're done. Well, you do have to weave in your end, but for the most part, you're done. Here is the finished garment. If I had all the hands in the world and all the yarn in the world and all the time in the world, I would make a version for every single K-pop group that I stan. I would make a Brat version. I would make so many different versions, but hopefully you can make your own version using the help of this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you also to my patrons. If you want to become a Patreon member, please check it out. It would really help supporting me and my channel. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys are having a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!